Hello everyone, my name is Marco Landry and today I will be replacing the clutch on my 2018 Yamaha R3 with a new slipper clutch from Yoyodyne. While I'm replacing this clutch, I will also be installing a DETENT spring from Spears Enterprise. If that's something of interest, keep watching and we'll get started shortly. So the goal today is really to, as I mentioned earlier, to replace the clutch and install a slipper clutch. So in this case, I've opted for the Yoyodyne slipper clutch that I just received this week. By the way, the Yoyodyne service is amazing. I placed the order on Tuesday or Monday, and I had the clutch by Thursday. So really great service, fast shipping. Definitely a big fan of Yoyodyne products and service. So in this case, the slipper clutch really allows you to limit the amount of back torque or engine braking when you downshift by a couple of gears. So it allows you to restrict or limit how much bouncing will happen on your rear wheel with the slipper clutch. So I mean, it's really a great product to not only improve your confidence, but also to allow you to focus on your riding as opposed to trying to figure out how to control the bike a bit better. So in this case, the clutch comes with a few different things. So obviously you can see here I have the pressure plate and the clutch boss. I also have in this little bag here, it's hard to see now, but you can see I have the red and the gray spacers. So those are the retainers basically that allows you to do some micro adjustment on the slippage of the clutch. So I'll probably go with the red the red retainer, the spring retainer, and I'll probably also reuse the retainer, or not the retainer, but the springs that came with the Yoyodyne clutch, as opposed to doing a mix and match of the springs in the OEM clutch with the springs from the Yoyodyne clutch. So this is totally a matter of preference, personal preference. If you decide to reuse some of the OEM spring, you can put the 4 OEM spring in this clutch, or you can mix and match, replace 2 of these springs with the OEM and keep 2 of the Barnett springs that came with the clutch. So when I'm going to be doing this, I'll also be replacing the DETENT spring from Spears Enterprise. So this little spring really allows you to avoid the false neutral and better shifting when you're going from gear to gear. So the spring's a bit stiffer, so it allows you to have again flawless gear shifting, as opposed to using the software spring that comes with the Yamaha R3 that is a bit softer, and quite often you'll end up with a false neutral, or you're trying to shift and you have a misshift. So that little spring is supposed to allow you to basically eliminate those misshift. So as I mentioned, your main thing required will be some paper towel or shop towels in order to clean up the oil that's gonna drop from the pan when you open it up. And in terms of the air tools needed, you can see here I have a few things. Let's see if I can get a decent angle here. So what is needed for this is that you'll need the 8mm socket in order to move the clutch cover. So that cover here will require some 8mm socket to remove all these bolts around. I got the GB Racing cover, but it doesn't matter. It's going to be the same size regardless. I'm also going to disconnect that hose here, so I believe it's a 6 millimeter wrench in order to remove this. I'll cut that zip tie. You'll need 12 millimeter wrench in order to loosen up those cables there. And also what's going to be required, with the drill here, you can see I have my impact wrench or impact drill with a 27 millimeter socket that will be required to remove the basket nut inside of that case there. And I also, Yoyodyne is mentioning that you need some Loctite as well. I believe they're asking for green Loctite. I'll use the red one because I don't have any green one here, but it should do the same thing. I also have some grease in order to hold the gasket when I put it back in place. Quite often people will replace their gasket cover, but I'm not going to replace mine. The bike is fairly new, so I don't need to replace it. You will also need, if I can get this right here, you will also need the holding tool for the clutch will be required. You need a flathead screwdriver and a hammer of some sort in order to straighten up the safety collar for the clutch basket nut. And I'm going to use some zip ties as well to attach this cover to the radiator so it's not in the way when I'm working. So you can use a bungee cord as well. Quite a few people will do this with a bungee cord. I'm going to just zip tie some zip ties around one of these little holes here, and I'm going to attach it to the radiator. So it should be out of the way and easy to work around this. You're removing these bolts here, make sure that when you remove this one, this is the drain bolt for the coolant. So there's a little washer behind this, so make sure that you don't lose the crush washer. In my case, with the GB Racing cover, there's two of these crush nuts. So there's one behind and one in front. So I have to make sure that I don't lose them and I don't drop them in titanium. So just have to be extra careful. And when you remove all these bolts, also make sure that you do this in the crisscross pattern so that you don't have any pressure points onto your cover. So what you have to do here is remove, there's 12 bolts. So you have to remove the 12 bolts on the cover. Normally, when you remove this, you would empty your coolant and you remove this bolt with the crush washer and you would drain all your coolant. In my case, I just changed the radiator hose last week. So these hoses have been changed and I haven't filled up the radiator yet. So I know for a fact this is all empty. So I don't need to drain any of my coolant first. I can just simply focus on removing the 12 bolts for the cover. All right, so when you I've removed all the bolts, the 12 bolts, I normally like to put them in a pattern so it's easier to put back together. But you can see here that when I lift that cap, there's a bit of oil dripping. So yeah, I've collected a little bit of oil, but it's not too bad. It's definitely a good idea to have a pan in order to do this so you don't have oil everywhere. And then the next step is to remove the remove the swing cable arm or the cable arm, sorry, and swing it backwards. So you have to turn it towards the back of the bike in order to remove it. So normally you turn it left and disengage from it will disengage from the push rod. So you can see here, I've just simply pushed this backwards and everything's coming in. And then there's still a bit of oil dripping there. So I'm just gonna slightly move it back and see if it's gonna come out. So I might have to turn this backwards a bit more. And you can simply wiggle it slowly until it comes out. Should be fairly easy to get out. Just have to be careful not to damage anything inside of the cover when you do so. So here you can see that after I remove the cover, I simply use some zip ties to attach the cover so that there's no strain or no tension in that cable here. And when you remove the cover, make sure that you be very careful with the gasket. So in this case, I told you earlier, I'm going to reuse that gasket because it's fairly new, hasn't been used that much. So I'm going to take this gasket and reuse it. So I'll just put it on the workbench now, let it sit straight so I don't damage it while I'm working on the bike. And we'll keep going after that, and we'll remove the clutch itself. All right, so here you can see that detent spring that I want to change. So that's the old spring that you see on the left side. So this is the spring from Yamaha that's quite soft. So I'm gonna reuse, or not gonna reuse, I'm gonna use or replace this with the spring from Spear Racing here. So this is what we're gonna use. This is what we're gonna do next. Uh, I don't have a pull spring tool. I think I'm going to be okay with pliers. So I'm just going to use pliers and try to pull the top of the spring and unhook it from the bottom and reattach the new one doing the opposite operation. The new springs installed. It wasn't too complex to install, to be honest. I was expecting a bit more work than this. It was fairly easy. What I did is I unhooked the top of it with just some long nose pliers. So I just basically pull the top of the spring up, and this little part at the bottom will drop down, and you're able to remove or unhook the bottom. And once this is done, you just repeat the process and take the bottom of the spring. So basically, this little part of the bottom here, and hook the bottom, and take your pliers and attach it to the top on that pin that's protruding there. So fairly easy. Next step is we're gonna disassemble the clutch. So we'll remove these four Allen bolt, and we'll pull the pressure plate off so that we can remove the clutch plates, and then remove the boss so we can install the new one. So you can see here that I removed the four springs, and no, there's quite a bit of thread in it, so it's you just have to be patient. Takes a bit of time. Fairly easy. No, it won't kick back when you're done. The springs won't jump at you. It's fairly easy to remove. It just takes a bit of patience again. So you could use a drill as well. In my case, I just use a wrench. Once this is done, you'll be able to pull that pressure plate. So when you pull it, just be careful that the plates don't come with it in back. So you just basically remove the pressure plate. The rod will stay in it. So we will need to reuse this. So don't discard this right away. And then we will just remove all the plates and keep the same order, because we'll put them back in the same order unless you're changing the plates. So basically you just pull them one at a time, and just make sure that you uh, remember the orientation. And I normally try to keep them stacked all clean and all nice, so I don't have to re-soak them in oil before I put them back. But I mean, this is totally up to you. You could stack them up, and after that, soak them in oil and put them back. But if you can manage to keep them clean, there's no reason to re-soak them again before you reinstall them. So we'll remove this, and after that, we'll be able to remove that little latch and remove that bolt, and we will install the new boss, the new clutch boss for the Yoyodyne clutch. I got all the plates removed and stacked neatly so I can put them back in same order. Um, and this is the next step here. We will remove this little flap here with a screwdriver. So the screwdriver and a hammer will just straighten this up so I can undo this 27 millimeter nut. So a lot of people normally struggle to remove that collar because they start with a screwdriver that's too big. So if you start with something that's really fat, you can't really get in here. So normally what I do is I start gently with a small screwdriver so that I can create a little gap. Once I have a gap big enough, Then I start using my bigger screwdriver, and you can almost just bend it just by going back and forth. But the fastest and easiest way, obviously, is to use your hammer and knock this up so that this safety collar is out of the way, so you can remove that nut right there. So when you do this, there might be small pieces of metal that might want to just like chip away. So just be careful that it doesn't fall back into your oil bin. All right. So the next step now is to remove the clutch boss here. So in order to remove the clutch boss, normally you would need some sort of tool. So in this case, I'm using a clutch holding tool. And what you do is, because no, it when you unscrew, it wants to go left. So what you do is that you just either use a piece of wood or something to hold it on. But in this case, I've moved my peg forward so it can lean on the peg. I'll probably just put a bit of a rag or something underneath so I don't scratch this or damage this. And after that, what you do is that you just take your 27 mil socket and an impact gun, and you just unscrew it with the gun or an impact gun or with a breaker bar. I've managed to loosen up the nut here, so now we can just remove it with my finger. So basically, you just remove this, and as I mentioned earlier, we won't be reusing the safety collar in the back, so you can just remove this here, and this part will not be reused because Yoyodyne provides a different one in order to secure the boss in place. So once this is done, I'll just unhook the clutch tool, remove the boss. Once the boss is removed, there's a washer behind here. Make sure that that washer doesn't fall off, and also do not discard that washer. Just leave it in place because it will be reused with the new boss after that. All right, guys. So I've been messing around with this for a little bit here. This boss was really tight, so I had to clean it up around so that my fingers wouldn't slip. And then, like, slowly I just wiggled it, up and down, all around it. So I just kept it around, like just turning it around and just wiggled it. And now I can easily pull it out. So as I mentioned earlier, when you pull it out, just be extra careful because there's a washer behind this. I think it just fell down now. Yeah, so the washer is right there. So just be careful not to lose that washer here. Here we go. So that washer will be reused here. So what I'm going to do now is that I'm going to use, I believe this is a 4 millimeter internal X key. So I'll remove those retainer and the springs, and we will have the boss free to be installed into the clutch basket. So stay tuned. All right, so now we're gonna put the boss in place. So basically, it slides back in place of the old one. Once this is done, I told you earlier that there's a washer here. So this washer comes inside when you dismantle everything from Yoyodyne. But you can see this one is angled. So it's cone shape, I would say. So this side here, the external side, has an angle to it. So let's do this again here. So this is going to go in place here. And then after that, we will reuse the nut from earlier, put on top of this. Before you do so, you need to put some tread locker on this threaded portion here. So I'm going to use some red tread locker, even though Yoyodyne suggests or recommends to use some green one. So now we want to reassemble everything. So I put the nut on after putting some some red tread locker. I've attached the clutch tool, and I've set up my torque wrench at 81 feet per pound, or 110 nanometer. And I've secured the nut in place. So now we are ready to start the final step of the assembly. All right, so now I just put the plates back on the boss. So I put them in the same order as they were before. And as I mentioned earlier, just make sure that they're clean. And if you install new plates, obviously you want to soak them in oil before you put them back on. In my case, the bike's fairly new, so I wasn't too concerned. The next step is that you want to remove the push rod from your old pressure plate. So that push rod, you simply just lift this up, and your push rod is here, and then you can insert this into the Yoyodyne pressure plate. So this is obviously a part that's being reused, so that you can put this, or you can reassemble it back properly. I've put the cover on, and I haven't assembled the springs yet. I was trying to determine what to do, what type of spacers I was going to use. If you remember the start video, I mentioned that you have the option of using the gray spacers or the red spacers. The gray spacers will give you more engine braking. In my case, I don't want to have too much engine braking start. Again, I'm not used to the bike, and I just want to see at first how the bike will behave. You also have the option to mix and match the springs. So you could basically take two of your OEM springs and stagger them or alternate them into the clutch here. So you could put two OEM and two Barnett spring that came with the Yoyodyne clutch, and you can adjust your engine braking that way as well. Again, in my case, I'm going to start with the Yoyodyne Barnett springs, and with the red spacers. So I have no, I'll have some engine braking, but not as much. Obviously, this is a personal preference. I'll start with this, see how it goes, and I might readjust that portion a bit later. And that's something that can be done trackside. It's not a lot of work in order to do this. So again, you can start with what you think feels good for you, and if it doesn't work, then it's easy to readjust. So just keep your old springs, and also keep the spacers handy so that you can tweak as needed. This is always a bit of a challenge to get those started, because you want to make sure that you tread the bolt properly in the treads. So normally I just use a T-handle and push the spring with my two fingers, or my thumb and my index finger. And while I'm doing this, my other hand is used to start treading this properly. And I'll use this at first to get everything going. And once I get closer to the end, I'll use the torque wrench, and I'll torque this at I believe it's 8 nanometer, the appropriate pressure or torque for this. So I'll tighten everything, I'll snug everything up, and I'll come back with the exact torque specs. Okay, we're at the second last step here. So this is a bit more frustrating here because it can take a few times in order to get this right. So what you want to do basically is take your cover and put it back on the bike. And what I did in this case is that I've put the dowel back in here, so you can see there's a dowel here that helps you with the alignment. And there's another one, there's another one right here as well. So this is the second one here. So these dowels help you with the alignment of the case. And when you do this, you also have to make sure that this wheel here will line up properly with this one. Otherwise, your case won't be able to go or to be fully seated. And the other thing that's really tricky is the teeth on the rod here. These teeth need to face the back of the bike. and then they will also line up with this oil here. And then you will turn this to readjust and pull that cover in and out to properly seat it. So it will probably take a few times. You just have to be patient. Sometimes it can take me about 15-20 minutes to get this done properly. I'm not very patient, so sometimes I have to step away and come back and do it properly. The other trick that might help you out here is that you can see I have some grease that I put on the gasket. The grease will help you keep the gasket in place so it doesn't keep falling off when you're trying to put that cover in place. Well, I think that would be it right here. It only took a few times, but basically you have to turn that arm to the left, and then when you feel that it's engaged, you turn it back right, and it should pull the rod at the right place, and also pull the cover at the right spot as well. So I believe that should be it. So right now, I think I'm just going to reassemble and see if it works. So everything seems to be aligned properly. So when you reassemble the cover, make sure that you put the right bolts at the right location. This one, for example, is the longest one, so I always start with this one first. And you just want to snug it up. You don't have to get anything tight at this point. You just want to make sure that everything is lined up properly, and then we can finish torquing them in a crisscross pattern. Next one I'm going to assemble will be the two bolts for the bracket at the top. I just have to make sure I don't forget my my cover here. And here we go. So we'll line this up properly here. Got slippery hands right now because of the oil or the grease. So we're gonna use the ratchet for that. Again, the goal is not really to put anything too tight. You just want to make sure that everything is lining up properly. Also, make sure that your gasket is not kinked. Now, when you're doing this, you shouldn't see your gasket sticking out. If you do, stop and double check everything, because it's critical that this gasket is well seated. Probably should have removed the oil and the grease before doing all of this, but I'll get all these bolts threaded, and after that I'll clean everything up, make sure that there's no junk around the case or the cover. And also keep in mind that once you do this, you also have to top up all the fluids after, right? So we just lost quite a bit of oil there, and obviously you have to replenish your coolant as well. So if you if you add flush your coolant, make sure that you remember to put the washers back in, the crush washers back in, so that the coolant doesn't leak, and you should be good to go. All right, folks, there's one thing I didn't mention here is that when you reassemble everything, if you want to know or if you want to make sure that everything is lined up properly, there is a little mark on the shaft here at the top. So you can see this little dot here. Normally it should line up with that little arrow at the bottom here. So this little arrow here and that mark should line up. So it allows you to confirm that everything is assembled properly. What I normally do on my bikes is that I will, on the cover, on the GBR cover, you can see that I've added a little mark. So I just take a file and you just file it lightly. I can also put some of the Proline paint as well. So you can use like a little marker like this and put a little dot there so that you know, when you reassemble everything, it's easy and visible. And you know, you don't have to do some guessing work. One thing as well that I didn't do initially, and I'm going to do it now, is they recommend, I think Yamaha recommends putting or adding some Loctite on those two bolts here that are holding the arm. So I'm going to put some blue Loctite on those two bolts, and I'll retight everything back to normal or up to specs. All right, looks like everything's back together. I was very lucky with the cover. I didn't have to try too many times, and it went fairly smoothly. The only trick I would say is that don't try to shove it or push it in right away. What you want to do is make sure that the rod is, the groove and the rod are facing towards the back of the bike, and then you clip it on and you turn the arm counterclockwise until you're a click or latch, and then you try to push it on with one hand and turn the arm towards the front of the bike until you hear a clicking sound, and it's going to pull the cover back onto the case itself. And I just cleaned everything up. The gasket was properly seated. I've torqued everything down to spec. I've put the hose back or connected the hose back for the coolant or the radiator. And I guess I'm back in business now. So I've pressed the clutch a few times. I can hear the plate moving properly. And now just gonna top it up with oil. Actually, I'm gonna do an oil change. And then after that, once I have the battery back in the bike, I'll do another test run, make sure everything's okay. All right, folks, I'm done. I've cleaned up everything. I've reassembled the clutch, make sure that there was no leakage, that everything was torqued properly, and adjusted the free plate on the clutch lever as well. So the clutch lever had absolutely no free play at first, so I had to use a 12mm wrench on the clutch cable, on the arm of the clutch cable, and just loosen it up a bit so I could get a bit more free play. So I don't know if you can see here, there's just like a little bit of free play, probably just enough to fit a quarter. So that's normally what I like to have, just a little bit of free play. And the clutch is engaging properly. I'm able to press the clutch. I can feel the plates moving, and I'm able just to press the clutch as well, put it in first gear, and when I drop, when I release the clutch, obviously everything's stopping. So I know that overall it's well done. It's working fine. Yeah, I mean, that's it. Overall, very happy with the results. Very happy with the process. It was not too painful. Let me know if you have any questions or comments, and that's it for now. Stay safe, and we'll chat soon.